welcome to No Deck. This is Terry Boozer. We are going to spend some time with you to talk through the variations and considerations for flat Roman shades. You've got the 5-inch double hem in here, which is nice because it's super simple, where that also shows you the markings of the first rings.
Correct.
And with 7-inch spacing between rings as your standard, then you've got a wonderful reveal, right? You've got the 7-inch spacing, which gives you 3.5-inch folds.
Correct.
And so then with 5 inches below that, you get a nice reveal.
Yep, and we're going to talk about how to actually calculate for you to determine what that reveal is.
Oh, okay, great. Right, because that's something you might want to change about it.
Exactly.
Great. Okay, well, I'm really looking forward to this. There's a huge variety, even with a basic Roman shade.
Exactly.
Right? Huge variety of different looks you can achieve by where you mount it, what type of mechanism you use, by different ring spacing, different column spacing, different shapes to your cut.
Let's start with the measuring and installing considerations. For an inside mount, the width should be 1/4 inch narrower than the opening of the window, and that's so that the shade has a little bit of movement room. And the length will be to the windowsill, or if you had a frameless window, whatever it's going to hit.
Do you take a deduction in length usually?
Not usually.
Okay.
I don't usually take one.
Because with that weight bar,
It just kind of rests. When you measure, you're going to measure 3 times. You're going to measure at the top of the window, in the middle, and then at the bottom. And then you're going to do the same thing for the length. You're going to measure on the left-hand side, the right-hand side, and then measure in the middle. And if it's too far out, if your measurements vary a lot, it might not be even conducive to put an inside mount shade.
Oh. So how much would you say is a little, like in your judgment and your thinking?
I would say
if it's more
half an inch.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
Like if it's 1/4 inch,
you can kind of fudge it. But if it does vary that 1/4 of an inch, you do want to use that smallest measurement. You will also need to consider the inside mounting depth of the window.
The amount of space you have to slide
Correct.
this in. Now for an outside mount,
We have a few other considerations. The width can be determined by, you want it at least the width of the framework. Yes, you want at least that, but I like to do it just a little bit more, maybe even 1 inch on each side, because when you're doing an outside mount, it's projected a little bit more, and that projection, even when that shade comes down, you'll still tend to see the trim on the side.
right, especially because of the fold gaps.
Right.
How about up?
Mounting up is great because that actually gets the stack even up off the window.
So you might go like 4 inches above the frame or more.
Right. Now you do want to, if you do go up above the framework, you will want to make sure that the entire mechanism is above that framework.
Typically 4 inches would clear
Yes.
most mechanisms, right?
Yes, it would.
So if you go up and then down.
If it's an outside mount, again, you might want to go right to the sill. You might go to the apron, or whatever specified length. You might want to extend that another inch just to make sure there's no light gap. The farther you go down and the farther you go out, the less light gap
Right.
you will
because
get
of the
in from the
projection.
sides of the window.
All right, that's great. So the outside mount, because of that projection,
What we do is we put little flaps on out of the face fabric.
that's just staple in here.
Yes, it staples to, I like to staple to the front and then come right to around to the side. That will hide that all that mechanism aspect.
Right. So it's not a return on the whole treatment. It's just a little flap
Just
to cover
little
the
flaps.
mechanism.
Yep. Another way you could do a valance as well.
Okay, now for some of the complicated parts.
Oh boy, here comes the math.
We've got Again, very basic one is rather small, but often shades are not that simple.
Right.
Often you're dealing with larger dimensions. You might need to consider more columns. Maybe we don't want to go with 7-inch spacing because maybe the fabric has a particular design that we're trying to, like pleat to pattern, or fold to pattern. And also we've got a nice reveal. Could you walk us through that from start to finish?
I will do so. The rings align vertically, forming the columns, and they should be evenly spaced across the width of the shade. So the recommended distance between the columns is 8 to 11 inches.
So this direction?
Yes.
8 to 11 inches.
8 to 11 inches.
Okay. I just recently learned how to make ribbed Roman shades.
Yes, that's really cool.
Yeah, so that's an interesting mission. And that's where there's ribs that are built into the lining. And with that method, you can actually go much wider with the spacing.
Yes.
Right, which with it cut down on the number of columns and the number of rings you're sewing on.
Right.
And the whole bit. So that's something to consider. But for the basic understanding, if you're not putting ribs in, if you go farther than that,
it starts to droop.
but kind of like swag between each column.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
And if you go smaller than that, one, it's too much work. But often some of the mechanisms require that much work. When you get into the mechanisms with cylinders, they require that much spacing for the operations to move.
Because some of the mechanisms have discs that slide, and if you don't have 8 inches or 6 inches or something between, you can get too close, and then the mechanism doesn't work.
Yep.
Okay, understood.
To achieve the desired column spacing between 8 inches and 11 inches, we use the midpoint of 9.5 to start our calculations with. That way when we round, we can round either up or down.
Up or down and still be within.
Still be within the 8 to 11.
Great.
So on the back of the shade, the first thing we need to do is measure the distance between the side hems.
This was a 24-inch shade. We came in 2.5 and 2.5, so that's 19 inches.
Right.
Divide that by 9.5. So 2 exactly. So we didn't have to round up or down. That means 2 big spaces between columns, and we only need a center.
Yes. Then you're going to redivide. You're going to take that initial distance, and you're going to divide by that rounded number. And that's going to give you the exact
spacing between columns. Good. Okay, I think I've got that.
All right. We're going to walk through one example. Okay, so we're going to do a 60-inch shade. When we measure the distance between the side hems, we're going to take we did the same side hems, so it's 60 minus 5 is 55.
Right, and really it's not about the side hems, it's about the distance between the outer columns, which on this shade happens to be at the side hems.
Correct. You don't want to go too much more in though, because then your side might start to drop if you're not using ribs.
Right.
So 2.5 really is the max.
Right. You don't want to come farther in, but you might have been farther out.
Exactly.
Yeah, for whatever reason.
Yes.
Okay.
So 55 divided by 9.5 is
5.78.
So that means the 0.78 rounds to 6. So we're going to have 6 spaces, which will mean 7 columns of rings.
And then to figure out the exact space, we take
55 divided by 6 equals 9.16 inches, the exact distance between each column.
9.16.
I know. It's not an ideal measurement.
And we don't worry about 16ths.
Right.
Right. So would you just kind of fudge it? You just put your marking a little bit more than
Yeah, what I would take all the distance down out of the middle. So I would go the smaller, go 9 1/8 on the outside.
Start marking 9 1/8, 9 1/8, 9 1/8, and then
and that middle is going to be a little bit more.
Okay, no problem. Right. And one of the things I like to do, 'cause I love math, but when you get into, I hate the English measuring system. So I like to use a speed method where you take the measurement between, which was 55, right?
Right.
And you can just
find the middle.
Yeah, find the middle. And then, although we're going to have to get 6 spaces, right? So we can take the middle, that's 3 spaces, and just fold that in thirds.
Well, there you go.
There you go. And there's your spacing. That works. Because if you can then have your creases and just mark on your creases. Because really, you can be a good 1/4 inch off.
Right. As long as you keep those columns the same
in line with each other.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's good to kind of create your markings, and then I even sometimes take that black outline and just fold it to the top, line up those markings, and then use the straight edge.
You can do that. You can do that too. There's another thing you can do is, you got some blue tape there?
Yeah.
I'll take it, and I'll probably use a stiffer ruler, you know, a hard ruler.
Yeah.
But let's see that for a second.
Okay.
So I would
A straight edge, like on a straight edge?
Yep, on a straight edge, and just go right to the 9.
Oh,
You
the
know,
9.5?
yeah.
Okay.
You know, wherever I need to be. 9. If you really were concerned about that 16th of an inch, you could put this on the 16th of an inch, and then you just have the mark, so you can just keep going.
Oh, got it. So you know that you just need to fall in here somewhere.
Right.
And you just keep
Yep,
going
just
that,
keep going
kind
that
of
way.
fudge back and forth until they're pretty close.
Yep.
Okay. All right, that's good. That's one of the things that I think some people get super
Hung
critical
up
about
on.
1/16 of an inch, and it's fabric. It's going to
Yeah,
move.
it's gonna move.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
The rings align horizontally, forming the rows. Now these are the ones that we have some compliance.
Issues with,
Yes. So we need to keep the rows of rings no farther apart than 8 inches to be
Okay.
compliant.
So on your shade, you had 7
I
inch
had 7.
spacing.
And the reason I had 7 is because 6 is usually my minimum. If you
Mm-hmm.
do anything smaller than 6, it just doesn't fold nicely to the front.
Yes.
So the 7 was exactly in the middle again
Mm-hmm.
of the 8 that is required for us to not go over, and then the 6 inches.
Your workroom standard, do you just stick with 7?
No, I don't usually. I actually do a calculated row spacing.
Okay.
What calculated row spacing does is eliminates a very awkward bubble at the top of the shade.
Mm-hmm.
Very similar procedure as the columns. We need to take a measurement first, and the measurement we need is from the bottom of the mechanism to the very first row of rings, which on our instance is the top of the hem.
Okay.
Okay, so you're going to measure that distance.
Okay, and then what?
Then we're going to divide by 7 inches.
Okay.
And that is because that is between our 6 inches and our 8 inches.
Right.
We will round that to the nearest whole number, whatever that number comes to be, and that will give us the number of spaces between the rows.
each row of rings.
Right.
Got it.
It's also the number of folds.
Mm-hmm.
Once we have that rounded number, you will divide that into that first measurement, and it will give you the exact space, and it's going to be between that 6 and 8.
Great. Okay, so you have an example?
I do. For our exact shade, if we were to use calculated row spacing, we would measure from the top of the hem to the bottom of the headrail. That should measure 27 inches.
Right, because we had a 36-inch shade
Yep.
minus the 5 inches
Of
of the hem
minus
to the
4
first
inches
row.
of the top.
27 inches between the lowest ring and the highest ring.
Right. So let's divide that by 7 inches for our in-between number. So we'll take that 27 inches and divide by 7, and we would get 3.86.
But you can't have 3.86
You can't.
rows.
You can't.
Okay,
So we round that to 4.
Okay.
And we'll take that 27
Inches
divided by 4,
by 4 spaces between rows.
and we would get 6.75 inches.
Okay. And 6.75 inches is the exact space between rows. And if we had done that, we would have a ring that was right there, which is an ideal place for it to be.
Well, actually, the mechanism acts as the last ring.
Oh, so we don't even have to
You
put
don't
a
even
ring
have to
there.
put that one.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have another example?
I do. For a little bit longer shade, about 50 inches long,
Okay.
but we're using a smaller mechanism this time. Our total distance for our mechanism and our board is 2.5.
Okay, so this was really small mechanism, so maybe like a do-fix. Those are kind of small, right?
Yep, the RBS, something
Oh,
like
the RBS system. Okay. So 50-inch shade.
minus the 2.5. Minus, this time our first ring is set up 7 inches.
Okay, why would you do that?
I would want more hem reveal. Maybe I have a beautiful trim at the bottom, real wide trim. Maybe
Or
there's a
shape.
absolutely.
Grommets. I've seen you do a shade with grommet. That's beautiful. Like
and you don't want to cover it up,
Right.
So you
With
have
the
to
folds.
set that ring up a little farther.
that row of rings up 7 inches.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
50.
50 less
2.5
Oh.
minus 7 equals 40.5. So we divide by 7.
So 40.5 inches divided by 7 inches, which is our ideal row spacing, equals
5.78. We round that up.
because you can't have 5.78 spaces between rows.
Exactly. So you round up to 6, then redivide your distance. 40.5 inches divided by 6 spaces equals 6.75 exact.
Oh, that's funny. It's the same as the other
I
one.
know.
I know. Oh, do we do the same thing?
Yes, you
We
do.
don't do that top row.
Right.
So we're coming down the 2.5, and then we're coming down 6.75, and that's our first row of rings.
Yes.
From the top. Nice. Well, that's really not that hard.
It's not. It's
I always default to the 7 inches, but maybe I should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really eliminates that, awkward little fold at the top.
Oh, there. Yeah, that's a nice illustration showing what happens if you don't consider the spacing.
Right.
Imagine if you don't calculate those rings.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, before we get to the variations, let's talk just one more thing about that reveal.
Okay.
So with reveals, I'd always struggled with, exactly where to put that ring on how much hem I really want revealed. And I finally was able to come up with a formula. So the reveal is directly related to where that first row of rings is.
That first row of rings determines some of what is revealed.
Correct.
Okay.
So what you do is you calculate how much you want revealed. Then you need to add half of the fold distance to
Yes, so that makes perfect sense. So in this shade, 7-inch row spacing, so we've got 3.5-inch fold,
Yep.
and that's covering 3.5 inches of our 5-inch space to the first ring.
Right.
So we're revealing about 1.5 inches.
Correct.
Right? It actually looks like a little more. You've got to kind of know that it does tend to look like a little more, right?
Right.
Because you kind of lose a little bit in the folds.
And you also lose a little bit with the safety rings on the back.
Right, because the ring is actually pulled up a little higher.
Right.
So, so if you want exactly 1.5 inches, you actually have to drop it down a little.
Right.
Well, Terry, it seems like we could do an awful lot to change the look of a shade just by changing the ring and column spacing, the row and column spacing.
Right. You absolutely can, and there's just so many variations of Roman shades. Let me show you a few. The relaxed shade is a variation of the Roman shade. You're just not putting the rows in the middle to be pulled up. When you get that wide smile, we might need to taper the sides.
Right, because if you take a shade that is cut perfectly rectangle and you cause a droop, it's really just pulling in the sides, right?
Right, and you don't want that look.
Right.
But, so you either taper the sides.
So you add fabric.
Right.
Your pattern
is going
angles.
outwards, right.
Or I've seen them too, right? You go straight and then you just taper some permanent folds at the bottom.
Yes, that will create a flat fold above the swag or the swoop area.
Right, right. Okay, good.
Okay. And then another variation of the Roman is the stitch tuck. So this you can actually stitch a line to the front of the shade, and it may have a rib in it, it may not.
Okay, you mean at the fold or at the rings?
It would be at the rings.
Okay, at the rings, so you're actually stitching a tuck.
Stitching a tuck.
And those are called tucked?
Stitch tucked.
Stitch tucked.
Yeah,
okay.
that's a front stitch tucked. And then you can also have a back stitch tuck.
And it looks like a little inverted pleat.
Right.
Stuck back there.
Yep.
With rib or without.
They're usually with. And then you have one of my favorites is the hobble, where you actually have the permanent folds placed in the shade when it's down. So it's not flat. It actually has those nice soft folds stitched into it.
And that's another class you're going to need to teach.
That is another class.
Yeah, there's a lot more going on with those types of shades.
Yeah.
And you know what? There's one other just really simple variation that if you've mastered this technique,
right?
It's just adding an extra fold, a permanent fold.
Yes. You just add a little extra length.
How much extra?
Well, one fold.
Okay, so one
row of spacing.
One row of spacing.
When you strung it, you would hold this two rows together. That actually is a really nice feature to get a flexibility in an installation with length.
Oh, because if it's
play with that a little
not
bit.
perfectly level or you're work isn't perfectly level,
Right.
right? The installer can
Could
adjust the
adjust
connection.
the level lock there,
Mm.
and adjust that size of that
Right.
fold somewhat.
And then when the shade's down, there's still one fold at the bottom hem there.
Right.
That I really like that.
Do you like doing
Yeah,
those?
and a lot of workrooms have that as their standard, even with a flat Roman
Right.
shade.
It gives it a little bit more interest than just have a flat shade.
If they're going to be down a lot. If
Right.
they're always going to be up.
Yeah, it doesn't matter because
Mhm.
you can't tell it's in there when it's up.
Yeah.
But absolutely.
All right. Well, Terry, thank you so much.